Juniper by Monica Furlong, Chapter 8. And so my life with Uni began. She was an odd mixture of busyness and laziness. She did not care at all about the state of the hut, and spent most of the day sitting in her chair in front of the fire, sometimes asleep, sometimes humming tunelessly, sometimes just still and quiet. Yet she had periods of extraordinary energy. Alone or taking me with her, she would walk for long distances, as on that first dreadful day, walking so quickly that I found I was out of breath trying to keep up. Often she was making for a hill, a forest, a ring of trees or of stones. Once there, she would search diligently for some particular spot. I could never work out where it was going to be, and having found it, would stay, singing a wild, tuneless song, muttering words that sounded like poems. Her eyes would be closed, her face set and concentrated. She smiled to herself quite often, but sometimes her expression would change to one of pain. She never said anything to me before or after these occasions. Just let me stand there on whatever windswept hill or moorland we happened to be, shivering and rather frightened. I wanted to ask her to explain these times to me, but I never had the courage. Soon after my arrival, we had climbed our own tor. Its sides were steep and gaunt like the ribs of a giant, and I arrived at the top with my heart pounding. I could see our tiny hut, a mere speck at the bottom, and there was a wonderful view of forest and hill, with the tor of Glasverin, and a village with its plowed fields away in the distance. On this occasion, Uni neither laughed nor wept, but simply stood quietly. Then she led me to a small wattle and daub hut that stood on the crest of the hill. Within it, like a queen in a hovel, was an extraordinary carved and painted figure set in a kind of cave made of stone. Her face was black, her eyes dark and wild, and upon her head she wore a crown decorated with a moon and stars. Her gown was blue and red. Sitting upon her lap was a baby, awkward and doll-like. A wreath of hedgerow flowers, the last beautiful flowers of autumn, entwined with berries, had been hung around her neck, and others were strewn at her feet or thrust into little pots. At her feet was a well, its ancient wooden lid beautifully carved with flowers and animals. There were candles, too, set around the rim of the well, one or two still alight. The others burned out as if many people had visited the place and left a burning candle as a memento of their visit. Uni, always so dry, so caustic, astounded me by suddenly prostrating herself on the floor, while I stood awkwardly by. When she got up, I saw that her face was wet with tears. Then she opened the well, threw in the dipper on its long chain, drank a little of the water, and replaced the dipper without offering any water to me. On the way back to the hut she was silent. Only when we had nearly reached it did she say sternly to me, "You are not to climb the tor, nor to visit the place of the mother unless I tell you to." Immediately I felt irritated, and as if I might wish to do so, though that steep climb would not otherwise have been much of a temptation. In fact, Uni was full of instructions about what I might and might not do. From the moment she woke me each day from my uncomfortable sleep, usually very early in the morning, she ordered me out to draw water, to grind meal, to start up the fire, to make porridge, to gather sticks, to sweep, to feed the chickens, and to chop up scraps for the pig. I did not much mind doing these things, since they helped to keep us warm or fed, or meant that the plates and pots were cleaner than when she washed them. It did annoy me, however, to see her sitting in her rocking chair, not helping, while I swept or cooked or cleaned the ashes from the fire, or staggered in with the pails of water. It made me feel that I was her servant, which I didn't like at all. Once, on a bad day, I mumbled my resentment at her, and she replied with one of her crows of glee, "Yes, you are my servant. That is exactly what you are." My only comfort was that I did at least keep the hut cleaner than she did, and that I soon learned to cook nicer meals. The two most painful things about my life with Uni, however, were cold and hunger. In my privileged life in the wooden palace, there had always been a fire blazing on the hearth, and I had always been warmly dressed and well fed. Life in the hut was very different. The thin walls did not keep in the warmth of our fire, and every night I woke up shivering, so that I felt tired and miserable the next day. As the winter approached, I went out gloveless in all weather, on my innumerable errands for Uni, and my cloak and boots, made for life at Castle Door, were not thick enough to keep out the damp and the cold. Soon I had chilblains on my hands and feet, which became very sore and drove me half mad with irritation whenever I did get warm. Uni showed no sympathy for my shivers or my chilblains. Once when I complained, she said, "You came here to make your life real. Cold, hunger, the hard floor to lie on, these are your teachers." If they were my teachers, I reflected angrily, then they made me very miserable. Yet I could not help noticing when I next picked up my spoon to eat my soup, that since I had had almost no food all day, the soup tasted better than any soup I had ever eaten in my life. It was as if my whole body had suddenly come alive and was singing. The flavor of every bean, grain, and vegetable in the soup spoke to me. Even the water I drank tasted wonderful. Was it just the purity of Uni's well, or was it that, desperately hungry as I was, my mouth was wonderfully alert to enjoy all that entered it? Similarly, when I came in, half frozen from a series of trips to the well, there was a special kind of joy in letting the warmth of the fire steal through my cold body, through the torment of the chilblains, though the torment of the chilblains spoiled it a little. It also occurred to me that I had never noticed the change from autumn to winter as sharply as I did now. Before, I was dimly aware, as everyone is, of the falling of the leaves from the trees, the coming of the frost, and the short dark days. Now, partly perhaps because of my fear of cold and hunger, I noticed that no 2 days were the same, that as the year declined, there were changes of sky and stars and the behavior of birds that I had never known before. Not, of course, that I was ever observant enough for Uni. "What were the clouds like?" she asked, as ever, when I returned from an expedition. "Did the wind change? What birds did you see? Which trees have lost all their leaves? What shrubs still have flowers upon them? What was the moon like?" It had been my habit to walk through the world in a pleasant dream, remembering stories or conversations, going back over bits of the past I had enjoyed, or having romantic fantasies about the future. Uni did not seem to understand this at all. "You are hopeless, hopeless," she told me angrily. "You will never make a Doran." I was wounded by this and sulkily tried to remember to notice the sorts of things she asked about, but she had an unnerving way, after I had made a point of counting the birds or observing the clouds, of picking on something quite new, the shape of the landscape, the number of footpaths and the way they joined one another, the appearance of people we had met by the wayside, or animals. I tried harder, but it seemed to be no use at all. In addition